Chapter 1: The Velvet Guardian. West Texas is not just a place, it is a living entity, made of heat, thorns, and a silence so vast it can swallow a scream before it ever leaves the throat. In Terre County, where red earth meets an endless blue sky, survival is a daily negotiation with nature. At the center of that vastness stood Dusty Creek Ranch, and on the porch of the main house, lying on wooden planks that creaked under his weight, was Rocco. Rocco was not the kind of dog people usually associate with fairy tale heroes. He was an American pit bull terrier, weighing 77 pounds of pure compact muscle. His coat was a deep blue-gray, the color of a storm cloud, broken only by a white patch on his chest shaped like a rough diamond. His head was broad and square, with jaws that looked as though they had been carved from granite. To a stranger, he was the image of danger. His eyes, however, told a different story. They were the color of sun-warmed honey, filled with an ancient intelligence and infinite patience. "Rocco, you have to stay still." The voice was thin, sweet, and carried the absolute authority of someone who is 7 years old. Emily Miller was sitting cross-legged on the porch floor, right in front of the dog's muzzle. She was holding a wilted crown of dandelion flowers she had picked in the yard. With small, clumsy hands, she tried to balance the crown on the dog's broad, slippery head. Rocco let out a long sigh through his nostrils, raising a small cloud of dust from the floor. He could have stood up and walked away. He could have shaken his head, but he did not move a single inch. He understood, through instincts that needed no words, that his primary function in life was not to guard cattle or bark at mailmen. His function was to be the support for that small human creature. Jack Miller, Emily's father, watched the scene through the kitchen screen door. He was holding a grease-stained wrench, having just crawled out from under the pickup truck. "Sarah," he called, without taking his eyes off them. "Come look at this." Sarah Miller appeared beside her husband, drying her hands on her apron. She smiled at the sight. "Beauty and the Beast," she whispered. "It still gives me chills sometimes," Jack admitted quietly. "I look at the size of that dog's neck, remember the stories people tell in town. They say his bite locks, that they're unpredictable." Sarah touched her husband's arm. "Jack, look at him. Emily is pulling on his cheek right now. He's practically asleep. When we adopted him from the shelter, he was shaking with fear, remember? He had cigarette burn scars on his back. He knows what cruelty is, Jack, and he knows it doesn't exist here. He's grateful." Outside, Rocco finally accepted his fate. The flower crown slipped to the side, covering his left ear, giving him a comical and undignified appearance for a descendant of fighting dogs. Emily laughed, a sound like wind chimes, and hugged the animal's thick neck, burying her face in his short, warm fur. Rocco closed his eyes. The world to him was a map of scents. He smelled diesel oil clinging to Jack, yeast drifting from Sarah in the kitchen, the metallic tang of an approaching storm miles away. But the scent that anchored his soul was Emily's: baby shampoo, milk, and dirt. In that moment, as the afternoon sun gilded the ranch, Rocco gently licked the girl's hand. It was a rough kiss, but a tender one. What Jack and Sarah could not see, what no human could truly comprehend, was the silent oath the dog made with every slow, powerful beat of his heart. "I am the barrier. I am the shield. Nothing touches you while I breathe. But Texas is treacherous. Peace is only a pause between dangers." And as the girl played, the wind shifted, carrying from the north, from the dry, rocky canyons, a scent that made the fur on the back of Rocco's neck rise almost imperceptibly. It was the smell of hunger, the smell of coyotes. Chapter 2: The Desert Siren's Song. The midday heat had given way to a stifling, stagnant afternoon. The air was so still that the oak leaves looked painted onto the landscape. It was Saturday, and the routine at Dusty Creek Ranch moved along at its lazy pace. Jack had gone back to the barn to finish fixing the truck's axle. The metallic clatter of tools echoed rhythmically, drowning out the natural sounds of the surroundings.
Sarah was upstairs in the house, enjoying the moment of quiet to organize the winter clothes closet, with the radio on low, playing country music. Emily was alone in the backyard.
The yard was bordered by a white wooden fence that separated the green, irrigated lawn, civilization, from the raw, thorny scrub that stretched for miles toward the mountains. The rule was the most important law of the house. Emily must never, ever go through the little white gate. Rocco was lying in the shade cast by the house. The heat made him lethargic. His eyelids were heavy. He was in a state of vigilant drowsiness, that light canine sleep in which the ears keep working like rotating radar dishes. Suddenly, something caught Emily's attention. It wasn't a toy, nor a bird. It was a hare, but not an ordinary one. It was a desert jackrabbit, enormous, with ears that looked like satellite dishes, standing statue still just beyond the white fence. The animal seemed to be staring straight at Emily, its nose twitching. To a 7-year-old, it was magic. It was an invitation. "Bunny," Emily whispered, hypnotized. She walked up to the fence. The hare didn't run. It made 2 small hops, moving a little farther away, then stopped again and looked back. It seemed to be waiting. Emily glanced toward the house. Everything was quiet. Daddy was busy. Mommy was far away. The little white gate, swollen from the heat and recent humidity, wasn't latched. The catch was only resting against the wood. With a sharp creak that made Rocco open one eye instantly, Emily pushed the gate. The hare hopped again, slipping into the low scrub of mesquite and cacti. "Wait, I have carrots," Emily lied, in the innocent hope of making a friend. She took her first step off the grass. Her pink boots touched the dry, dusty soil of the desert. The texture of the ground changed. The sound of her footsteps changed. Rocco lifted his head. His ears, usually relaxed, were now pointed forward. The creak of the gate had been the first warning. The second was Emily's sudden silence. She had stopped humming the song she'd been singing just minutes before. The dog stood up. He didn't bark right away. He trotted to the edge of the porch and looked out into the yard. The lawn was empty. The cloth doll lay discarded in the grass. Rocco went down the steps, ignoring the mild ache in his hip joint, a reminder of his bad days before adoption. He went to the fence. Emily's scent formed an invisible trail, but to his nose it was as clear as a neon-lit road. The trail passed through the gate and headed into the brush. Her scent was mixed with something else, the scent of the hare, and, deeper still, carried by the warm breeze drifting from the canyon, the musky, acidic smell he had noticed earlier. Coyotes. And not just one. The scent was complex, layered with odors that indicated a pack. A primitive urgency surged through Rocco's body. His muscles tightened like steel cables. He let out a deep, booming bark that resonated in his chest like thunder. Woof! He waited. No response from Jack in the barn.
The electric sander had started up, smothering everything. Rocco barked again, a series of 3 short, urgent barks, staring at Sarah's bedroom window. But the radio and the air conditioner formed a sonic barrier. Emily was already 50 meters away, descending the bank of a dry creek, disappearing from sight behind a dense sagebush. She was entering a territory where human rules did not apply. Rocco knew he couldn't wait. The loyalty running in his blood was stronger than any obedience training telling him to stay. He pushed the gate with his nose and crossed the line. The gentle giant was left behind. Now, moving with predatory agility among the thorns, the protector emerged. He lowered his head, sniffed the dry earth, and began to run. The chase had begun. But time was running against him. The sun was starting to sink, and in Texas, when the sun goes down, the shadows grow teeth.
Chapter 3. No Man's Land. The Texas desert has a cruel way of distorting reality. What looks close is miles away, and what seems like a safe path is often a trap of thorns. Emily had been walking for what felt like an eternity, though it had only been 20 minutes. The giant jackrabbit had vanished long ago, dissolving into the brown landscape like a mirage. The excitement of the initial hunt
had evaporated, replaced by an uncomfortable, sticky sense of confusion. "Bunny?" she called, but her voice came out small. The dry air seemed to suck the moisture from her throat instantly. She stopped and slowly turned in a circle. Everything looked the same. Twisted mesquite bushes, prickly pear cacti with their flat, thorny pads, and rocks. Lots of rocks. She looked back, expecting to see the comforting white roof of her house or the safety of the fence. But the land was rolling.
Without realizing it, she had descended into a shallow depression, an old, dry riverbed that blocked her line of sight to the ranch. The world had gone quiet. Not the silence of a library, but the vast, indifferent silence of nature. The only sound was the electric buzz of cicadas, which seemed to grow louder as the afternoon heat reached its peak. Emily felt a sharp sting in her foot. A thorn had pierced the side of her fabric boot. She whimpered and sat down on a flat rock to try to pull it out. As she did, the sun struck the back of her neck at full force. She felt dizzy. "Daddy?" she whispered. Fear, cold and sharp, began to bloom in her stomach. A few miles away, Rocco moved like a gray ghost. He wasn't running wildly, he was tracking. A pit bull's nose isn't as famous as a bloodhound's, but Rocco's tenacity made up for any lack of olfactory specialization.
He had picked up the scent of fear that Emily was beginning to give off, a subtle chemical change in her sweat that a canine nose translates as danger. Rocco ignored the heat. He ignored the burrs clinging to his paws and hairless belly. He pushed forward at a steady, economical trot, mouth open and tongue lolling to the side, trying to cool the blood boiling in his veins. Suddenly, he stopped. Emily's scent was strong there, near a cluster of rocks, but another smell cut through the air, fresh, acidic, predator urine. Rocco lowered his head and growled, a low sound vibrating through his ribs. He sniffed the base of a creosote bush. The marking was recent. Coyotes. They had passed through less than 10 minutes earlier. And worse, the Coyotes' trail and Emily's trail were converging. They weren't just wandering, they were hunting something. The dog lifted his head and looked at the shimmering horizon. His amber eyes narrowed. He felt no fatigue. He felt only a single mission, etched into his DNA. Protect the pack. He broke into a run, lengthening his stride, his quads kicking up red dust as he plunged deeper into the wild land. Chapter 4. The Cry in the Void. Silence fell over Dusty Creek Ranch when Jack turned off the sander. The metallic echo died away, leaving only the sound of the wind slamming a loose barn door. Jack wiped the grease from his hands with an old rag, feeling the satisfaction of a job well done. He glanced at the clock on the barn wall. 4:30 p.m. Time for an iced tea and a game of tug-of-war with the dog before dinner. He walked toward the house, the late afternoon sunlight casting everything in a melancholy orange hue. Stepping into the kitchen, the air conditioning was a welcome relief. "I fixed the axle," he announced, opening the fridge. "Where are the girls of this house?" Sarah came down the stairs with a basket of folded laundry. "I'm here." "Emily should be in the yard with Rocco. I saw her through the window about—" Sarah stopped halfway down the stairs, frowning. "About 40 minutes ago, I think. It was so nice and quiet, I lost track of time." Jack poured the tea but froze with the glass halfway to his mouth. "Quiet?" he repeated. "Rocco hasn't barked in hours." A discomfort, light as a feather, brushed the back of Jack's neck. He walked to the back door that led to the porch and looked through the screen. The yard was empty. Emily's rag doll lay face down in the grass, abandoned like the victim of a crime. "Emily?" Jack called. He didn't shout, he just called. No answer. "She must be playing hide-and-seek," Sarah said, setting the basket on the table, but her movements slowed. Jack's tension was contagious. Jack opened the door and stepped into the heat. "Rocco! Emily! Snack time!" The wind stirred the oak leaves. Nothing else moved. Jack went down the porch steps, walking faster now. He circled the house, checked under the deck, looked inside the doghouse. Empty. Rocco's water bowl was full and untouched. That's when he saw it.
At the far end, where the green lawn ended and wild Texas began, the small white gate stood wide open. It swung lazily, creak, 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 banging against the post. Jack's heart stopped for a second and then slammed back to life like a sledgehammer. "Sarah!" The shout tore from his throat, raw and terrified. "Sarah!" Sarah ran to the porch, pale. "What is it? What happened?" Jack was already running toward the gate. He stopped at the boundary, staring down at the packed dirt. The footprints were clear in the dry dust, small boots with star patterns on the soles. And overlapping hers, the wide, heavy tracks of a large dog's paws. "She went out," Jack whispered, the world spinning. He looked at the vast stretch of brush and canyons reaching to the horizon, a maze of rock and thorns. She went out, and Rocco went after her. Sarah reached his side, grabbed the fence, and let out a sob that seemed to come from the depths of her soul when she saw the open gate. "Where are they, Jack? It's almost dark." Jack gripped his wife's shoulders, trying to keep his own sanity anchored. "Listen, Rocco is with her. That dog would give his life for her. That's good. It means she's not alone." "But what if—" Sarah began, the old fear about the breed surfacing through the panic. "What if he hurts her, Jack? He's an animal. If she ran and he instinctively—" "No," Jack cut her off, firm, even as his own mind played horrible tricks on him. "No, I've seen the way he looks at her. He went to protect her. But we need to move." Jack turned and ran back to the house. "Call Sheriff Miller right now. Tell him we have a missing child in the North Zone near Dry Canyon. I'm getting the rifle and the ATV." As he ran to the gun cabinet, the weight of reality crushed down on Jack. The sun was dropping. Coyotes, rattlesnakes, mountain lions, and the cold of the desert night. He grabbed the Winchester rifle, checked the ammunition with trembling hands, and prayed. He wasn't a religious man, but he prayed. "Take care of her, Rocco. For God's sake, be the good boy we believe you are." Outside, the sun touched the horizon, bathing the world in blood red. The race against time had officially begun. Chapter 5. Tracks in the Sand. The desert at night is not an empty place. It is a place that watches. Rocco was moving at a frantic trot. His lungs worked like bellows, and the heat that had troubled him earlier had now been replaced by icy adrenaline. He was no longer following only Emily's scent. He was following sound. His ears, cropped and scarred from a past he tried to forget, picked something up. A sound no dog owner ever wants to hear. A sharp, broken cry coming from deep inside a limestone ravine.
Rocco skidded to a stop at the edge of the drop. Below, in a small sandy clearing surrounded by 10-foot stone walls, was Emily. She was curled in on herself, her knees pulled to her chest. Her blonde t-shirt was smeared with dirt, and the bow she had tried to place on Rocco earlier lay discarded on the ground. "Emily!" Rocco's bark was not a warning, it was a call of relief. The girl lifted her head. Her eyes were red from crying, her face streaked with dust and tears. When she saw the powerful, square silhouette of the bit of bull against a darkening sky, she felt no fear. She did not see a dangerous dog. "Rocco!" she cried, her voice breaking. "Rocco, you found me!" Rocco did not descend the ravine carefully. He leapt, his front paws absorbing the impact of the 6-foot drop with brute force. He ran to her, covering her face with frantic, clumsy licks. He sniffed every inch of her, searching for blood, snake bites, any sign of injury. Emily wrapped her arms around his neck so tightly Rocco could barely breathe, but he didn't care. He let out a low whine, a sound pit bulls make that resembles a human cry of happiness. But the relief didn't last. Rocco pulled away from the embrace and turned his head toward the top of the ravine. The wind had died, and in the deadly silence, a new sound emerged. Claws scraping against stone. Above them, silhouetted against the last light of dusk, appeared a lean shape with pointed ears and a bushy tail. Then another, and another. The coyotes were not like farm dogs. They were creatures made of hunger and cunning. They were smaller than Rocco, but there were many of them.
Their eyes did not glow with emotional intelligence, but with the cold calculation of those who see only meat and opportunity. One of the coyotes, the largest of the group, let out a short, sharp bark, a command. The pack began circling the rim of the ravine. Rocco stepped in front of Emily. His body changed. The softness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a metallic, merciless gleam. He lowered his center of gravity, his hind legs digging into the sand. He did not bark. A true pit bull does not bark when it is about to fight. He released a growl that started deep in his stomach and vibrated through the entire ravine, a sound so low Emily felt it in her chest. "Rocco," she whispered, clutching the fur on his back. "What is that?" "Stay behind me." That was what Rocco would have said if he could speak. Instead, he said it with his body. He became a wall of gray muscle between the girl and the darkness.
Chapter 6. The Siege and the Cold Night in Texas is a betrayal. The 104-degree daytime heat evaporates, and the air suddenly turns cold, as if the desert were trying to freeze what it failed to cook. Emily was shivering violently. The shock of being lost, combined with the drop in temperature, was draining her strength. She curled up against Rocco's flank. The heat radiating from the dog's body was like a living radiator. "I'm cold, Rocco," she murmured, her voice growing sluggish. Dehydration and exhaustion were overtaking the small girl. Rocco felt her shaking. He knew they couldn't stay there forever, but climbing the ravine with Emily in his jaws was impossible, and leaving her alone to seek help was unthinkable. He was a prisoner of his own loyalty. Up above, the pack was growing impatient. There were about 6 coyotes.
They knew they had the numerical advantage, but the gray dog below was something they had never faced. He was bigger than any herding dog they had ever tried to attack. The coyote leader slid down the rocky slope, moving in silence. He stopped about 10 feet away, teeth bared. 2 others followed, flanking Rocco from the right and the left. Rocco never took his eyes off the leader. He understood how predators worked. If he showed weakness, if he looked away for even a second, they would attack the girl. One of the younger coyotes, driven by hunger and arrogance, suddenly lunged toward Emily's leg. It was a fatal mistake. Rocco moved with a speed that defied his weight. There was no warning. He didn't just charge, he exploded. In a millisecond, his jaws snapped shut in the air, inches from the coyote's neck. The predator recoiled with a terrified yelp, leaving a tuft of fur behind. Rocco returned to his original position in front of Emily before the others could react.
He snapped his jaws once, a sharp crack of bone against bone that echoed like a gunshot. "Leave!" The pack retreated into the shadows, but they did not leave. They sat just beyond Rocco's range of vision, yellow eyes glowing like embers in the dark. They were patient. They would wait until the big dog was too tired to keep his eyes open. They would wait until the cold paralyzed the girl. Meanwhile, miles away, the headlights of Jack's ATV and Sheriff Miller's vehicle swept across the desert, but the beams were far too small for the vastness of the night. The sound of the engines was swallowed by the wind beginning to howl through the canyons. "Emily!" Jack shouted, his voice already hoarse with desperation. "Rocco!" He stopped the vehicle on top of a hill, staring into the dark abyss ahead. "Sheriff, we won't find them like this. It's too big." Sheriff Miller, a man who had seen many things on that land, looked at the radio.
"The Midland search helicopter is on the way with thermal cameras, Jack, but it'll take 40 minutes. If they're in a hole or a ravine, the heat signature will be hard to pick up." Jack slammed his fist against the ATV's handlebars. He stared into the darkness, unaware that less than 3 kilometers from where he stood, his dog was fighting the most important battle of his life. In the ravine, Rocco felt Emily's head grow heavy against his ribs. She had slipped into an exhausted, dangerous sleep. The dog slowly lay down, circling the girl with his body, hiding her beneath the warmth of his chest, while keeping his head raised, eyes locked on the darkness. He would not sleep, not tonight. Chapter 7. blood on the silver sand. The full moon climbed to the top of the sky, turning the Texas desert into a landscape of silver and deep shadows. In the ravine, the cold was now a sharpened blade.
Emily was sunk into a lethargic sleep, her breathing shallow, forming small clouds of vapor in the icy air. Rocco did not move, but every one of his senses was operating in overdrive. The coyotes had changed tactics. The pack's silence was more terrifying than their howls. They moved like gray smoke, sliding along the ravine walls, testing angles, searching for a gap in the gray giant's guard. The pack leader, a male alpha with a scar running across his left eye, gave the signal. It wasn't a sound, but a shift of his shoulders. The attack came from 3 directions at once. 2 coyotes leapt from the side rocks, aiming for Rocco's back, while the alpha charged from below, targeting the dog's throat. If it had been any other dog, the fight would have ended right there. But Rocco was not an ordinary dog. He was a pit bull, a breed defined by its resilience, explosive strength, and above all, its refusal to retreat. Rocco didn't wait for the impact. He hurled himself forward, intercepting the alpha in midair. The sound of bodies colliding was like 2 sandbags slamming together. Rocco clamped his jaws onto the leader's shoulder and hurled him against the limestone wall with brutal force. At the same time, he felt teeth tear into his ear and his rear flank. The other 2 coyotes had mounted his back. Rocco released a roar, not a bark, but a guttural sound filled with ancient fury. He twisted his body with an agility that defied his size, shaking the attackers as if they were rats. One of the coyotes was thrown far away, crashing into a cactus and yelping in pain. The other managed to bite Rocco's front leg before being driven back by a powerful swipe. Emily woke to the sound of carnage. She opened her eyes and saw, under the moonlight, the gray blur of Rocco fighting against fast, snarling shadows. "Rocco!" she screamed, terror instantly clearing the fog of sleep. Hearing her voice, Rocco's determination doubled. Blood streamed from his torn ear, staining his gray coat and dripping onto the silver sand, but he felt no pain. Adrenaline had turned his nervous system into pure steel. He positioned himself over Emily again, but this time he was not just defending. He was hunting those who had dared touch his treasure. He stepped forward, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made the pack hesitate. He snapped his jaws in the air. Clack! Clack! A warning that the next bite would not be to the shoulder, but to the skull. The alpha, limping and humiliated, stared at the gray dog. He saw that there was no fear in that animal, only an unbreakable will. Coyotes seek easy prey. They do not seek wars of annihilation. With a low, defeated howl, the leader retreated into the rocky shadows. One by one, the others followed, disappearing into the darkness of the canyon. Rocco remained in a fighting stance for long minutes, his chest rising and falling, warm blood dripping onto the cold ground. Only when the last trace of coyote scent vanished on the wind did he allow his muscles to relax. Chapter 8. The Long Walk. Rocco turned toward Emily. He was panting, and the trail of blood in the sand showed the price of victory. "You're hurt, Rocco," Emily began to cry, reaching out to touch her friend's torn ear. Rocco gave her hand a quick lick, then firmly took the collar of Emily's jacket in his teeth and tugged gently. He knew they couldn't stay there. The smell of blood would attract other predators, maybe even a mountain lion, and the cold would finish what the coyotes had started if they didn't move. "You want me to go with you?" Emily asked, wiping her nose on her sleeve. Rocco released the jacket and gave her a gentle push with his snout, pointing her toward the least steep way out of the ravine. The journey back was a test of will. Emily was weak, her 7-year-old legs giving out every few yards. Every time she stumbled and fell, Rocco was there. He positioned himself beside her, offering his body like a living handrail so she could lean on him and stand up again. They walked slowly under the moon. Rocco led by scent, but not by the scent of home. The wind was blowing the wrong way. He led by the scent of man.
He could smell the metallic tang of fuel and Jack's sweat from miles away. With every step, the wound in Rocco's leg hurt more. He was losing blood, and stiffness was beginning to creep into his muscles. But he looked to the side and saw Emily's blonde hair, shining like a beacon in the night, and that was enough to keep him moving. Suddenly, a sound cut through the air. It wasn't a howl. It was a rhythmic, heavy, deafening sound. Thup, 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 thup. A blinding, white, circular light dropped from the sky, sweeping over the land like the eye of an angry god. Rocco crouched, shielding Emily with his body, his eyes half closed against the glare of the rescue helicopter.
Up above, the thermal camera operator shouted into the radio, "I've got them! Sector 4, near the base of Dry Canyon. 2 heat signatures, 1 small and 1 large are right beside it. They're moving!" Below, Rocco looked up at the light. He didn't know what it was, but he felt the danger ending. He let out a long, loud bark, the first bark of celebration in his entire life, which echoed across the valley. Jack, less than a kilometer away on his ATV, saw the helicopter's beam fixed on a single spot in the desert. He gunned the engine, it roaring as he bounced over rocks and brush, tears streaming from his eyes in the wind. When the ATV's headlights finally illuminated the 2 figures in the middle of nowhere, Jack slammed on the brakes so hard the vehicle nearly flipped. He ran. "Emily!" The girl ran into her father's arms, and for a moment, time stopped in the Texas desert. Jack hugged her so tightly it felt like he would never let go.
Sarah, listening to everything over the radio from the porch at home, fell to her knees and cried with gratitude. But then Jack looked to the side. Rocco stood a few yards away. He was covered in dust, blood, and scars. His ear was in tatters, and he was clearly limping. He didn't try to jump on Jack. He just stood there, watching, his tail giving a slow, exhausted thump. Jack Miller, the man who had once been afraid of his dog's breed, walked over to the pit bull. He knelt in the dust, placed his hands on Rocco's broad face, and rested his forehead against his. "Thank you," Jack sobbed. "Thank you for bringing my little girl back, you brave boy." Rocco closed his eyes and let out a deep sigh. The mission was complete. Chapter 9. The Operating Table and a Mother's Heart. The arrival at the ranch was an explosion of lights and sounds.
Ambulances from the neighboring town and pickup trucks from neighbors who had volunteered in the search lit up the yard as if it were daytime. When Jack's ATV emerged from the darkness, a collective cry of relief rose into the night. Sarah ran before Jack even stopped the vehicle. She pulled Emily from the seat and wrapped her in a desperate embrace, checking every inch of her daughter's body. "She's okay, Sarah. She's cold and exhausted, but she's all right," Jack shouted, his voice breaking. But Emily, still trembling, pointed behind her. "Rocco, Mom! The animals bit Rocco!" Only then did the crowd fall silent. Rocco climbed down from the ATV with difficulty. Under the harsh glare of the headlights, the dog's condition was clear. His gray coat was matted with dried blood and red dust. His left ear was torn in 3 places, and he couldn't put weight on his front paw. He walked to the porch, but his eyes were not searching for glory. They were searching for Emily. As soon as he saw her safe in her mother's arms, he collapsed heavily onto the wooden floor, releasing a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. The town veterinarian, Dr. Eris, who had been there to help with the horses if needed, stepped forward immediately. "Bring him inside, now," the doctor ordered. "Jack, put him on the kitchen table." The dining table, where hours earlier Emily had tried to place flower crowns on the dog, became an emergency operating table. Sarah held Rocco's head, whispering softly into his ear while Dr. Eris cleaned the wounds. "Coyotes," the veterinarian said, removing a predator's tooth lodged deep in the pit bull's shoulder. And judging by the depth of these marks, this wasn't an opportunistic attack. It was a real fight. He faced an entire pack to protect that little girl. Sarah looked at Rocco's paws, the broad feet now being wrapped in bandages. She felt a stab of guilt as she remembered her initial fears.
The dog the world labeled a monster had acted with a nobility few humans could ever match. Rocco never growled once during the stitching and cleaning. He only watched the hallway where Emily was being examined by paramedics. When the girl appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a silver thermal blanket, Rocco gave a weak thump of his tail against the wooden table. Thump, thump, thump. "Is he going to be okay, doctor?" Emily asked, her eyes full of tears. "He's a hero, sweetheart," Dr. Eris replied with a tired smile. "And Texas heroes are made of iron. He'll have a few scars to tell the story, but he'll be chasing butterflies again in a week." That night, no one slept in separate rooms. Jack and Sarah set up a camp of mattresses in the living room. Emily slept deeply, protected by the warmth of the fireplace, and Rocco, fully bandaged and smelling of antiseptic, slept at her feet. The desert silence outside no longer felt threatening. The Guardian had conquered the night.
Chapter 10. The Hero's Legacy. 6 months passed. The Texas summer gave way to a golden, cool autumn. Rocco's wounds had healed, leaving hairless scars on his ear and shoulder, but he wore them like medals of honor. The story of the Dry Canyon Pit Bull spread across the entire state. The local newspaper published a photo of Rocco with Emily, and he even received a canine honor plaque from the Sheriff's Association. But none of that mattered to Rocco. He didn't know what a newspaper was, and he didn't care about plaques. The real change was internal, at the Miller Ranch. Jack Miller had become the breed's greatest advocate. Whenever he heard someone talk about the danger of pit bulls, he told the story of that full moon night. He showed Rocco scars and explained that a dog is not defined by the shape of its head or the strength of its bite, but by the love it receives and the loyalty it chooses to give. On a Sunday afternoon, the scene on the porch repeated itself, with one difference. Emily was once again trying to balance something on Rocco's head. This time, it wasn't a crown of wilted flowers, but her favorite cowboy hat. "Stay still, Sheriff Rocco," she ordered, laughing. Rocco, with his cropped ear and honey-colored eyes, closed his eyes and relaxed. He could smell the approaching rain, the coffee Sarah was brewing in the kitchen, and the sweet scent of his girl. He was no longer the dog who trembled in the shelter. He was no longer the shadow that fought in the ravine. He was Rocco Miller, a member of the family, the strong beating heart of a home that had taken him in when no one else wanted him. The sun began to set behind the limestone hills, painting the sky with the same colors as that terrible night. But now, there was no fear. Jack stepped out onto the porch and sat in the rocking chair beside the dog, placing his heavy, gentle hand on the animal's head.
"Good boy, Rocco," Jack whispered. Rocco let out a contented sigh. In the vast, unforgiving Texas, where nature often seems to try to drive people away, there was a small piece of land where courage and loyalty had taken deep root. And as the wind swept over the cacti and canyons, the world knew that the blonde girl would never walk alone, for at her side there would always be the gray shadow of the most unlikely hero the West had ever known.